My name is Mitchell Stevens. I'm a sociologist and a faculty member here in the Graduate School of Education and a co-convener of Education's Digital Future, which is a year-long effort of the Graduate School of Education to take advantage of the tumult that has come to the education sector in the last couple of years for as much intellectual productivity as possible. My co-convener in this effort is another Graduate School of Education professor, Roy P., who's unable to be with us this evening. The rest of the EDF team is here. I'll ask them to stand. Abby Larson, a postdoctoral fellow, Laura Moorhead, Abel Tweeter and poster, Daniel Green, and we've got quite a few members of the class, Education 403X, Education's Digital Future. Could those students stand, please? Come on. You know who you are. Yay, good, good. These guys have formed the core of basically a weekly conversation that many of you have dropped in on as the year has gone on. Our effort has been, like I said, to exploit the moment of tumult for as much intellectual productivity as possible, but also to make sure that Stanford is having a sustained conversation about this moment in history, and the students who have participated in that effort have been instrumental in that work. I want to start by letting you know about a little rain shower of upcoming events here at Stanford in the coming days and weeks. Since you're in this room, I know that you're interested in issues of digital education, and it's a really good time to be you here right now. We have Why Tomorrow here in this room, a faculty panel on research opportunities in online and blended courses. Stanford has produced, since we started online.stanford.edu, how many courses, John? About some 60 courses. In various formats for various audiences, and faculty across the university are using those courses to do iterative research on their own instruction, but also to do a range of scientific investigations. This event is sponsored by Stanford Online, with which the Graduate School of Education is doing a great deal of business. So come tomorrow and grab a sandwich for that if you like. Next week, as part of EDF, we have a panel on the new co-viewing. Co-viewing is young people consuming digital media alongside or in tandem with or perhaps purposefully independently of their parents. This is a rich field, if you can imagine that, right? This is a rich field of research, and it's an important field of research because so much teaching and learning happens in digitally mediated contexts for young people. And a nice reminder of the long tenure of that tradition is Lori Takaguchi, who will be coming from the Sesame Workshop. Remember them? Remember those people, those Sesame Street people? Also Savita Murthy and Carlin Lorente from SRI International. You don't have to bring a gift, but we're having a birthday party for Stanford Online. Next Thursday, May 30th, on the lawn outside of the Vice Provost for Online Learning's office. It's been quite a year for a lot of people who are engaged in digitally mediated instruction across the university, and we thought we should have some cake and balloons. So join us for that. And then on the 4th of June, we'll have another, what is officially a public forum, which means, among other things, that you get refreshments here in this room on new media literacies and participatory culture, which is about scholarly investigation about the whole range of capacities that learners are learning, developing, and are needing at this moment in history. Bridget Barron, a faculty member at the Graduate School, will be here to join us for that, as well as Nicole Pinkert from DePaul and Elizabeth Soap from Oakland's Youth Radio. Come one, come all, bring a friend, join our mailing list. I realize that time and attention are the scarcest of your resources, which is why I'm so pleased that you're here. And why I'm asking you to pay more time and attention to activities such as these. I'd like you to encourage you to join a growing number of people from all walks of academic life here at Stanford and far beyond Stanford who are pushing everything not related to the current tumult in U.S. higher education to the front and center of their desks. Because I promise you this, if you and I do not take leadership at this moment in education history, someone else will. I promise you this, if you care about the value of teaching and learning as public goods, if you care about the future of learning science, data science, social science, if you care about how education is paid for, planned for, and knitted into the life course of your children and grandchildren, do not leave this moment to others. And I'll promise you something else too. It's fun. It's thrilling, in fact, to be a part of this moment of fundamental change in the basic character of the educational enterprise. If you've been attending our events this year, you already have a sense of how much fun that can be. And if this is your first date with education's digital future, I imagine you will learn as much this evening. Our focus tonight is on college access. College, something that is now almost essential to the American dream of social mobility and has in recent years become both easier to find and harder to attain. Easier to find because our national higher education ecology supports many thousands of schools, over 100 brick-and-mortar institutions in the Bay Area alone, with almost countless more educational opportunities online. Harder to attain because the chronic diminution of state government support for public higher education has made seats in the most demanded classes scarcer, informed academic advisors fewer. Harder to attain due to the steadily rising price of conventionally delivered college instruction and the shifting of college costs from the public coffers to individual students and their families in the form of government-subsidized loans, which in their total now surpass the amount of consumer credit debt in the United States. It has become clear to many that the basic business model of U.S. higher education, how we produce, consume, and pay for college, is changing. To help us think through this question, our team assembled a panel of critical observers and practitioners of higher education at the current moment. And we look for cosmopolitanism, and you're getting some this evening. I'll introduce each of them briefly here in the order in which they will offer their remarks. And here's what will happen. The four panelists will speak for about 10 minutes each. Some of them will give slides. Some of them, the great iconoclasts, will refrain from PowerPoint presentations. Then we will open it up for a discussion among the four of our panelists, and then we'll have plenty of time for a town hall forum with mics that we pass. Okay? All right, our first panelist is Laura Hamilton. She's assistant professor of sociology at the University of California at Merced. Broadly, her interests include gender, sexuality, family, education, and social class. These things all go together in sociology. I can say that because I'm one of the tribe. Hamilton's first co-authored book with Elizabeth Armstrong at the University of Michigan was released just this winter by Harvard University Press. It's called Paying for the Party: How College Maintains Inequality. And it uses an ethnographic and longitudinal case study of a moderately selective public university to gain some insight on why so many students leave college with so little to show for it, and for whom this is most likely to be the case. Ann Kirshner is Dean of Macaulay Honors College of the City University of New York. Her career spans an unusual range of experiences and organizations. As an entrepreneur, her startup businesses include Primetime 24, NFL.com. I didn't know about that one. Fathom, a for-profit online learning venture in partnership with Columbia University, the London School of Economics, and other leading schools. Her first book, Sala's Gift, tells the story of her mother's wartime rescue of letters from Nazi labor camps and has been published in German, Polish, Italian, French, Czech, and Chinese, but not Esperanto yet. Her new book, Lady at the OK Corral, The True Story of Josephine Marcus Earp, was published by HarperCollins in March of 2013. She also has a great essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education from when? Was it the fall? On MOOCs, yeah. This fall, yeah, alongside one by Kate Stimson. Brian Murphy is president of De Anza College in Cupertino. He was instrumental in the development of the Democracy Commitment, a national project aimed at ensuring that every community college student has an education in democratic practice. Previously, he was executive director of the San Francisco Urban Institute at San Francisco State, a position he held after serving as chief consultant to the California State Legislature's review of the master plan for higher education in the late 1980s. Brian has taught political theory at the University of California, Santa Cruz, Santa Clara University, and San Francisco State University. And Stephen Koslin, our fourth panelist, is the founding dean of Minerva University, which aims to be an online Ivy League institution. I think you have to have a football team to be an Ivy League institution. Stephen served as that's not in his bio. Stephen served as director of the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. Prior to joining Stanford, he was the John Lindsley Professor of Psychology and Memory at the William J. I got to do that over. Was the John Lindsley Professor of Psychology and Memory of William James and Dean of the School of Social Sciences Dean of the Social Sciences at Harvard, having previously been chair of the Department of Psychology there. His forthcoming 13th book, Top Brain, Bottom Brain, develops a new theory of cognitive modes, different thinking styles that affect how each of us approaches the world and interacts with other people. Laura? I forgot one! There's another one. Sorry, guys.
Say, that's not me.
What happens now?
I can.
Do you know how to push the button?
Yeah, I'm
okay.
good. I know how to push the button.
Okay.
It's all right. I have a Mac. All right. All right. Well, thank you, Mitchell, and thanks for having us. I'm really excited about this lively discussion about education digital future. Today, my central contribution is to offer some insight about the state of higher education as it is, particularly the in-space and place four-year experience. My vantage point is going to come from Midwest University, which is a moderately selective public flagship in the Midwest. And as Mitchell noted, I conducted a longitudinal and ethnographic study of this institution over the course of 5 years. With my co-author at the University of Michigan. Our study resulted in this book, Paying for the Party, How College Maintains Inequality. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today come from this book. So what does a close look at Midwest U tell us about, well, anything? Almost half of students at a four-year college attend a moderately selective public institution just like Midwest U. It's actually the modal four-year residential experience in this country. MU is neither one of the small group of highly selective institutions like Stanford, nor is it a broad access or open access institution. It really represents the middle swath of the four-year residential experience. It's also a typical multiversity, in that it tries to satisfy multiple constituencies. For example, schools like MU have long offered the affluent and exclusive social playground. They have offered access to cutting-edge research and knowledge production. And at the same time, state universities like Midwest U were founded as engines of mobility for in-state residents of modest means. Now, satisfying all of these constituencies equally is actually virtually impossible, particularly in the current fiscal environment. As you're all aware, there have been massive, I say recent, but it depends on how you think of history, particularly since 1980, cuts to state and federal support have made schools like Midwest U more reliant on tuition dollars. One result has been the turning to out-of-state and international student enrollments and decreasing the in-state enrollments, particularly for students of limited financial means. Schools like MU can't compete for the academically talented or academically prepared of the affluent. Instead, they compete for perhaps the less studious set of the affluent, whose interests in college are primarily social, not academic. And what I want to really talk about today is this has implications for how university life is structured. It has implications for who is served well by an institution like Midwest U and who is not served very well. The study on which the book is based started in 2004 when my co-author and I and a research team entered a dormitory floor. We had a residence hall room on the floor, and we hung out, interacted with the women, tried to learn how they interacted with each other over the course of the year. And it's also longitudinal in that we conducted 5 annual interviews with the women from the first year of college all the way through, and then followed them as they transferred out into the workforce. Now, residents on this floor were really similar in a lot of ways. It's a very homogeneous sample. They were women, which is true of today's typical college student. They were unmarried, childless, age 18, U.S. born, identified as white. They started at college at the same floor, at the same university. But they differed in one critical aspect. They had lots of class variation. There were students who were from upper-class families, their parents owned private jets, and there were students who were from working-class backgrounds and struggled just to get by. This really allowed us to train our gaze on social class and investigate the university's role in shaping students' class outcomes, and also the extent to which social class of origins mattered for where they ended up. We found fundamentally that the organization of social and academic life on MU's campus was structured around the needs and interests of the high-paying, less studious students that the university sought to attract. The result was what we call the party pathway, which is effectively the organizational infrastructure that supports a primarily social experience in college. Now, you can envision the party pathway at MU or any other school as a really well-developed highway system where it's really easy to get swept into it and really hard to get off. And it's impossible to avoid unless you want to take some backcountry road. Once on the party pathway, too, students don't want to leave. They don't want to exit, right? And they don't want to get off. Now, a robust party pathway tends to have a few familiar social features. This would be like big-time college sports, a thriving Greek system that's really supported by the university, and a party culture. A lot of these schools are on the top 100 party list, the Princeton Review, right? Academically, the party pathway has features as well. It requires majors and courses that don't take as much effort. They have higher GPAs on average, which suggests an ease of earning an A, and they're associated with more limited learning. Richard Aram and Joseph Aroxa's book recently came out, or not recently anymore, Academically Adrift, talks about this, the extent to which certain majors and courses students don't learn much over the course of college. Some examples to give you concretely would include things like fashion merchandising, event planning, a host of business light majors that are not located in competitive business schools, communications, sports broadcasting, human development, which is sort of the modern-day equivalent of home ec. Home ec. Yeah, it's effectively the modern-day equivalent of home ec. Now, schools that have a more robust party pathway have more of these majors. MU even had a whole school devoted to it. Other common features are limited Friday classes so that you can have a longer weekend. You laugh, but it's so true. And faculty and student interests are interlinked on this. No faculty want to teach on Friday. Students don't want to go to class on Friday. Ta-da! Everybody agrees. And also the scheduling of academic events around social events, like rescheduling tests to accommodate rush, which is what we observe. Now, when the party pathway is robust, other pathways to an institution suffer. A professional pathway, which offers what most of us think college is about, which is preparation for a professional career, becomes really narrow. It's hard to find, it's hard to navigate, and you basically need a really skilled, highly educated professional parent on that journey with you. There are too many temptations, too many bad decisions that can be made without this sort of focused one-on-one guidance beyond that which is provided by most overtaxed academic advising staff at universities. The mobility pathway, which offers disadvantaged individuals practical credentials that lead directly into a job, becomes broken and barricaded. It's kind of like, I grew up in the Midwest. There are a lot of these country roads that are pothole-ridden, and then they turn into dirt or gravel at some point, and you're just not really sure where it goes. It's exactly like that. Most universities keep small mobility programs that cull off the top of disadvantaged and minority students and offer them lots of help, but nobody else gets any. The party pathway offered something that a very small and select group of students could actually translate into economic security, which is a primarily social college experience. Two groups that were well served. One was women from upper class and solidly upper middle class backgrounds who could pursue the party pathway without much harm to their future. This was in large part not due to their academic record. They had very weak academic records, but they had parents that could call up other CEOs of other large companies and secure their children jobs. It did not matter what they did in college, period, just that they had a degree. They also had money to send their children to big cities where jobs and affluent marital partners were located. So that group was fine. Another group that was fine was a set of women who were from highly educated professional families, professors' children. I tell myself my children will be fine. They're 2 and 4. Already worried. These parents helped their children to navigate the social and academic pitfalls of a school like Midwest U, and they were fine. Everybody else was not fine. They struggled. There were 3 sort of groups. One group was a set of students who got pulled onto the party pathway early on, but they never should have been there. Their parents simply didn't have resources to compensate for low GPAs and easy majors that didn't necessarily translate into jobs. Others set out on the professional pathway. They wanted to be doctors, dentists, lawyers, but got really derailed by structural features of the party pathway. Women in these first 2 groups left college unable to get a job requiring a BA. They became bank tellers, waitresses, pizza delivery people, cold calling salespeople. These are not jobs that people want right out of college. There's reason to believe that these students, it wasn't anything about them. They were no different than their more affluent peers. There's reason to believe they would have done better elsewhere. Less privileged students seeking the mobility pathway perhaps suffered the most at MU. Not a single one of the working class women who were on that residence hall floor graduated from MU. Not one. Most left for regional, less prestigious campuses. Although we were sort of worried about this transfer initially because we thought prestige is better. Actually, those who left did better than those who stayed. And it made sense considering that at the new schools they transferred to, there was no developed Greek system and there were fewer ways to go astray academically. More students like them working jobs who had adult lives. So as these experiences suggest, the structure of campus life at MU is not set up to accommodate the majority of students that walk through its gates. There's a fundamental mismatch here. So what are some of the lessons learned? Something's fundamentally broken at schools like MU. Change is really unlikely unless we see a massive public reinvestment in higher education and reversal of current state and federal funding streams. However, call this the pessimist in me, the end of the golden era of higher education has come. There are a lot of people who don't see it happening again, at least in my lifetime. And the higher education population itself is really shifting. The majority of students who are entering post-secondary education are not traditional students. They do not look like the women on the dormitory floor that I studied. Most experts also predict a decline in the number of well-prepared students who are affluent with college-educated parents in the national college attending pool. there's going to be increasingly a shortage of students who are going to pay top dollar for an education like that MU offers. So digital education, a lot of interests converge around digital education. Education in place and space is just massively expensive for those who are providing it. You got to have the flowers, the fountains when the parents visit. It's all the academic staff, the dining hall. It's all very expensive. But it's also expensive for those who are consuming it, right? The majority of students seeking post-secondary education want affordability, convenience, and quality from their education. They don't want to pay for rock climbing walls, or maybe they think they want them, but they don't really want to pay for rock climbing walls, majors that are not going to lead to a job, gourmet dining, or any other thousands of extracurricular options. But what I want to say and what I want to leave this on is that I have a caveat. There's something worth really preserving from the education at a school like Midwest U. Our research led us to be really attuned to the embodied aspects of the college experience. These are experiences that require physical movement to another place, that require interacting with people in new settings. Even women whose college experiences from a strictly rational, objective perspective didn't advance them on the class ladder claimed that college was worth it because it made geographic mobility possible for them. Moving from a small provincial town to a large city and any other opportunities for travel during college was cited as the main benefit. Without these experiences, leaving home would have been absolutely unimaginable for most of these women. The embodied experiences of higher education also allow for the formation of social skills, physical styles, cultural tastes, social relationships, things that are actually very valuable. This requires sustained interaction with others who are educated, connected, and possess valuable forms of capital. Optimism for digital education rests in part on the belief that education offers pure knowledge and credentials that people can absorb and take anywhere, move anywhere, and deploy them. We found that the ability to translate a degree into a job rested on a host of factors beyond the skills themselves. Online education is not necessarily going to pay off for somebody stuck in remote education with poor labor market and limited network ties. In many ways, people and jobs are still very much entrenched in place and space. So I want to sort of leave you with this challenge, thinking of ways to creatively leverage the benefits of digital education, but with some sort of embodied educational experience, perhaps thinking about what this might look like. With that, I'll turn it to Ian.
Thanks, Laura.
Was that good?
That's great. Don't you hate that moment when the speaker notes show up very briefly and everybody sees it? You're going to say thank you to Mitchell for inviting you. And I've been a real fan of watching education's digital future from the outside. So it's a real pleasure to be here. I took Mitchell at his word to ask us to talk about new forms of college access. Because he asked us if we wanted to talk about the basis, how we think about college access on the basis of our own experience and expertise. And so one of the things I'd like to start with is just a brief walk down memory lane to remind myself and share with you what the context is for how I think about college access, which eventually is going to lead us to the institution that I have the pleasure of leading now. So I might as well start with the Statue of Liberty because I am a New Yorker, and also because my mother was an immigrant who learned English when I learned English going to school. And I have always felt, actually, you know why that has a blue bar over it? Because when I went to University of Virginia, they put your Social Security number right on your business card. So State University of New York at Buffalo, University of Virginia, Princeton, never paid a single dollar of tuition. Okay?
You never paid.
No, my parents did not pay a single dollar of tuition. Actually, when I went to University of Buffalo, I never knew anybody who had gone to any private institution. What was a private institution? I went to SUNY Buffalo because tuition was free, and my dad thought that was a really good idea. So when I finished my PhD in English, we were talking before, Laura, about the job market. Well, I really do believe that the job market in 1978 for PhDs in English must have been historically the lowest it ever was. So I left academics and embarked on a long sojourn in media and technology. I did work at the NFL for 5 years, and I think that my experience in media, going from broadcast television to cable television to satellite to sports, really was an interesting warm-up for how I think about technology in education, because the media kept changing, and I changed along with it. Of course, since my degrees were in English, none of that was anything I had any formal training for, until I got to the Modern Language Association, which was my first stop after finishing a PhD in English. Anybody in this room remember an acoustic coupler? So the first time I saw an acoustic coupler, so this is around 1978, I thought this was the most magical thing I had ever seen. You mean you could put a phone in there and some information would flow to another place? I thought this was absolutely amazing. And I guess what it taught me was that all of these things that I had spent all these years in graduate school doing, you could do them in new ways. And I hadn't necessarily had the formal education to do it, but with a good liberal arts education, you can learn how to learn. So I draw a direct line between that first aha moment in technology to what eventually became Fathom, which was an online learning company that I started together with Columbia University, and what eventually became a consortium of 14 institutions, 7 in the U.S., 7 in the U.K. We were MOOCs before there were MOOCs. And later on, maybe one of you will ask me what it was like when I came to pitch Stanford in 1998, which was a pretty interesting experience. So Fathom was very much a milestone along the way, and I guess I probably hold down the dubious role of techno-utopian on this panel. But all of that led to me very much to the experience I've had for the last 7 years at Macaulay Honors College. All those themes that I experienced personally of access and excellence and 21st century learning, nimble learning styles, those were all the attributes that I saw CUNY experimenting with its honors college, and they were very much something that I wanted to be part of. What is so exceptional, I think, about this place is the sense that it is highly leveraged. It sits on top of the City University of New York as its honors college. The City University of New York, for those of you who don't know, has 500,000 students. About half of those are full-time students. About half of those are part-time students. But it is the central institution for the City of New York. You cannot walk into any organization, store, company, and not meet a CUNY alum or a current CUNY student. And when the Honors College was created, they made one very interesting decision that was made before I got there, and that was that it would offer free tuition, totally on a meritocracy basis, but that every student would get free tuition. What I've learned really in the last 6 years since I've been there is that what's more important than the free is really the freedom. What changed last year was not only the advent of MOOCs, but the recognition of debt and how that sits on the back of so many American students. It's not only the effect on them because they've got to pay the money back, it's what it drives them to do because they immediately have to go off and think about making a lot of money. So free has been an incredibly important attribute of Macaulay Honors College. How do we do it? With all due respect to the state of California, I'm very grateful to be living in the state of New York, where the tuition is actually paid by the state. 60% of those 500,000 students at CUNY overall are getting some form of tuition remission. And even if you're paying full tuition at the City University of New York, it's $7,000 a year. It's actually less than the out-of-state tuition in New Jersey. So we have students who come from New Jersey to CUNY because it's less expensive to go to CUNY, even as out of state. I thought perhaps I would offer something in the way of predictions or looking at trends. I actually think that at the center of the crystal ball that we should be looking at is not only the word access, but the word innovation. So there's a couple of things I'd like to point to as ways to increase access in higher education. And I'm going to leave out the obvious of more state funding and more philanthropic dollars, and that's because I don't actually think that's enough. I think even if the state stepped up to what I suspect most of the people in this room think they ought to be doing, we in higher education have the obligation to go beyond the same old, same old. It's not just enough to think that the state's going to go back to doing what they used to, even if that myth made us feel good. And that's not only a question of cost, but how we serve the very best students. Innovative solutions, I think, are absolutely critical. We've got to look at new formats. You know, we'll talk a little bit later on, I'm sure, about MOOCs. MOOCs, to me, are sort of the new libraries. They're ways to dabble in subjects that you're interested in. Yes, you can finish a MOOC. The majority of students don't. Well, that's sort of like taking out a book from the library, where you have no financial obligation to finish it. You may get enough from a couple of pages, or you may want to actually finish the whole book. So I do believe that MOOCs are going to be an important part of the puzzle as we go forward. Self-credentialing, I don't know who decided that 140 credits was an immutable number that we should all aim for, but I wish that person would come and tell me what that means. Seat time, you know, the idea that you've got to sit in a class for a certain number of months and years to justify your credential is also, I think, an anachronistic notion. We do a lot of work with e-portfolios to show students what they've learned. I guess I ought to point out, Macaulay is actually quite a traditional place. And so what I'm pointing out here, I think, are some signposts along the way, and I think e-portfolios have a very important role. Experiential learning, study away, study abroad. Grab a college graduate in the next couple of months and ask them if they liked their college experience, and then ask them what was the best part of their college experience. And I can practically guarantee you that if that student studied abroad, what you're going to hear is that the best part of their college experience was when they weren't there. Try it and let me know if it works out for you. And so I very much believe that study abroad needs to go from something that is on the periphery of the college experience to something that is central to it. And it's something that schools should be, I believe, supporting more. Teaching to outcomes, skills, and careers. I was very interested in what Laura had to say about students who succeed because their pathway is well defined. I don't think that's something that we should be as frightened of as we are sometimes in higher education by drawing a really bright line between vocational learning and a liberal arts education. I think there's a lot more crossover to come in the future. Competition and collaboration. You know, there's been this whole kerfuffle over whether Michael Sandel is taking over the world and whether faculty are unfairly competing with the sage on the stage. I actually think it's okay for faculty to explain to students why their class is better than a MOOC or an online class or whatever. Competition can be a really wonderful thing, as can be collaboration. So innovation, to me, that's really what the center should be, not simply access, but higher education taking the role, and you heard a clarion call for that from Mitchell today, taking up that obligation to innovate how we deliver education, as well as broadening access to the greatest number of students who will benefit from it. I look forward to talking to you later.
The PowerPoint. Is this on now? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mitchell, for the invitation, and thank you for all of you taking your time on this fine evening. I'm very mindful of the fact that I'm speaking from a very particular sector of American higher education and with a very particular set of experiences that may have a particular, therefore, relationship to the question that you've raised in this series of seminars. I'm from one of California's 112 publicly funded two-year community colleges. That's one of the 1,200 community colleges in the United States. We enroll 13 million Americans. That's a little over half of all undergraduates enrolled in the United States. And as most of you know from what you know about California, it is where a large percentage, indeed the preponderant percentage of immigrant, working class, non-white, poorer students from the United States have access to higher education. And indeed, in California's Master Plan for Higher Education, the community colleges bear a particular and odd relationship to their brothers and sisters at the two university systems, because the master plan projected two radically different concepts of access. We have the most restrictive and elite public Research One institutions in the United States. Maybe only the University of Virginia has a comparable narrowness of access to the University of California, a relatively narrow access for students who, according to the metrics of admission, are admissible. And on the other hand, the most democratic and open admission of any educational system in the world probably is at the California community colleges. The legislation says, in fact, that to be at my institution, you are to be 18 and capable of benefiting from instruction. And although it sounds from some of the students you studied at Midwest U that they wouldn't be admissible at my institution. It's a separate issue. I'm very mindful, moreover, of the way in which a particular language, a particular logic, a particular narrative has dominated the last decade in American higher education. It's a language of the economy. It's a language of economism. It is, I believe, deeply reductionist and deeply institutional, and it has narrowed significantly the national conversation about American higher education, in which the outcomes are about the preparedness of persons for their entry into the job market, in which the first president in the history of the country from whose lips the words community colleges actually came twice, spoke of us as career centers, spoke of us as the place where the job market for American capitalism would somehow be solved, neglecting, I think, to remind us that it is capital that produces employment and not those of us producing the employable. But what was lost in that narrative, I think, is the broader purposes of American higher education. And part of what I'm, in effect, talking to is not so much the question of access, but the question of access to what end. And so the question my institution raises for the largely working class and immigrant and non-white students who come to it is not just do you have access, because legally you do, but access to what and to what end? What do we mean when we speak of an educated graduate of De Anza College? Let me just give you a snapshot of the school, just so you have a sense of it. It's 24,000 students. It's the largest community college in the South Bay, dwarfed by City College of San Francisco, parenthetically. But nonetheless, it's large. We're in the most affluent suburb, or at least one of the three most affluent in the Bay Area, and yet only 10% of our students are from Cupertino. 50% of our students are from San Jose. We have 3,600 Mexican-American students, 2,700 Vietnamese-American students, 1,500 Filipino students, 1,000 Korean students, 756 Iranian-American students, 1,300 African-American students. You're beginning to get the picture. It's a complicated, multicultural, multilingual mix of students. Among the most talented students competent to enter the University of California or Stanford sometimes choose to come to us first. But the vast majority of our students, 85% of them, come lacking college-level skills. And so they are with us usually longer than 2 years. And the question for us is, what are we preparing them for in a region that, in its sort of Rotarian self-congratulation, thinks of itself as the center of all innovation in the world. 70% of venture capital in this country is invested in this valley. It's the source of much of American ingenuity and productivity, and at the same time, riven by deep divisions of class and race, with marginalized communities in whose life unemployment is higher now than it was 5 years ago, higher this year than it was 2 years ago, in which the recovery is not reached. Those are the communities from which our students come. So when we think of what we want out of a De Anza education, we locate the question of the new media, the new technology, the new digital future in the context of what they need to be engaged in their own education. Our budgets have been cut 20%. We've only dropped our enrollment 11%. That means we've got a college in which everybody is working harder to engage more students. It would be easy for us to imagine a massive online way of reaching, at least nominally, more students for less money. If the only narrative were the financial narrative, that would be an answer. But it would be an answer that begs the question we haven't yet asked, which is, do we know how to engage students, particularly working class students, particularly students who lack academic skills? Do we know how to engage them in that medium and have them be successful in anything other than the narrowest technical fields? What we're looking for our graduates is that they leave our college with a set of human characteristics as well as the capacity to compete in what I will charitably call the colonized curriculum that we have. Our entire academic structure is determined by the admissions requirements at the University of California and derivatively the CSU. And for Stanford, really derivatively. We send about 50 students a year to Santa Clara. We send about 4 to maybe 3 to Stanford each year. We send 800 to the University of California, 1,400 to the CSU, and 500 to out-of-state privates and publics. So we're doing something according to the nominal metrics. When the big report card comes out, De Anza is always near the top or at the top. So in terms of the public narrative, we're meeting those metrics. But we want something else. We'd like to be able to say of a De Anza graduate that he or she is a generous, compassionate, engaged person. That when they go back into the communities from which they come, they go back as competent political organizers, capable of holding down good jobs, of organizing unions in those good jobs, of fighting to change the valley in which they live. To not say of their future that it is determined by somebody else, because somebody else has power, which is the case now, but in the participating, their capacity to participate in changing the structures of power in the valley where they live. So that we don't want to think of them simply as the next workforce. The folks not yet quickly enough trained so that what business wants is H-1 visas. But instead, people who can talk about seizing leadership in their communities. That's what we want. So when we look at the dominant narrative, we see two things. The fiscal crisis of the modern state That's what we see. We see a state that has chosen not to tax itself adequately to support the neediest amongst us. That's what we see. Symbolized spectacularly by today's great hearing on Capitol Hill, in which there was a coming to account regarding the insufficiency of the American tax system to bring resources to its public sector. We are the tail end of that insufficiency. We're the result of that insufficient politics. And so our feeling is we have a responsibility to engage our students so that they can change that politics. So that rather than being victimized by it, they can participate in it. They can understand power and how to use it and how to be responsible with it. Those are very different outcomes than just graduation rates. And if the national narrative is dominated by the Gates Foundation completion agenda, and the only thing you can then talk about is quality, it's in the interior of quality we want to locate the most uncommon of our colleges, namely the American community colleges. We do not want to be thought of as the training ground for American workers, as if we have no role to play beyond that. There's not a single student at De Anza College who does not know he or she needs work. They don't need anybody to tell them they need work. They know that. The question is, can they fully live their lives as democratic citizens, regardless, parenthetically, of their legal status? 600 of our students are undocumented. We don't view those 600 students as a cluster of deficits, things they lack. Think of it, they're all bilingual. They've crossed multiple borders. They've suffered the private indignities and public stupidities of God knows how many bureaucracies. These are folks who have skills. These are competent students. So our answer to the new learning paradigm, particularly when they cut us, is to turn to the asset we've got, which is to turn to our students. So what we've done is we've created a curriculum that is increasingly based on learning communities, in which the metaphor of familia is an actual organizing principle, in which hundreds of students are enrolled in courses in which the principal focus of their work is with each other, in which peer mentors now exist where before we might have had professional counselors. I have 22 paid professional counselors for 24,000 students, and 4 grounds crew to handle 112 acres. So we're not waiting on the state. We've got one resource, and that's the human beings that are on that campus. An astonishingly competent faculty. I have never in my life met a faculty more focused intellectually on the question of pedagogy than the De Anza faculty. And I thought I'd taught at some cool places. These folks really know what they're doing, and their principal allies are the students. So the way we approach the technology question came to me last week when one of the familia from one of the sociology classes came and said, we had some odd experiences online and didn't really like it, but we realized something's happening over there, and so we'd like to explore, we'd like to do our own research on the ways in which these new social media and these new methodologies, and they weren't even sure what name to call them all, how can they help us reinforce familia? How can they help us maintain community? How can they facilitate our helping each other? Now that is a really cool research agenda. That's one worth doing. So we've been talking with Stanford about ways in which we might work together to facilitate our own study of ourselves so that we can better understand which of these technologies work, for which students do they work, in what social environments do they work, but where the category of working is not simply the formality of completion, but the substantive development of young people capable of assuming what we believe is their rightful place in a democratic society. Thanks.
Well, you can imagine what it's like to follow that. This has been an incredible lineup. I've learned a lot from this. Thank you so much for organizing it. and for inviting me. So I'm going to talk about something really new and really different. I'm going to use an acronym, STAR, to help organize this. It's a lot of information, and I'm just going to summarize. Hopefully we can drill deeper in discussion afterwards. I'm from Minerva University, which is going to be a top-tier liberal arts university where we aim to prepare the students to succeed professionally after they graduate, but also to lead full lives. So the STAR acronym stands for, let me just give you a preview. The S is about the students and science. The T is technology. The A is about alignment, okay, of incentives and interests, as well as how the curriculum is structured. And the R is about residence. So we are not an online university. They live in residence halls. We have campuses. So let me start with the students. Our overall goal, which dictates everything we do, because we're backing in everything else from this, is to produce leaders, innovators in a global context. Three things. Innovators, mostly entrepreneurs, leaders, global context. And we used science. We're very empirically oriented, so we're going to be selecting people based on these goals. And our admissions tests are very different. It's not even clear we're going to use SATs. That's up for discussion right now. What we're seeking is not so much the standard well-rounded student that places like Stanford and Harvard and all the rest seek, but rather what I'm calling spiky kids. That is, if you imagine a bar graph where we're looking at how good you are at different capacities, it's very spiky. That they're at least 98th percentile on at least one thing, and maybe 85th and everything else. Why are we doing that? We want to take kids who've got some kind of a talent and help them to learn to use it more effectively. And, at least as important, we want them to learn to work with other people who have different profiles. Because we think going forward, most of the problems facing society are so complex, it's going to require groups or teams to address. So you've got to learn to work with other people effectively and people who aren't like you. Most of our students will be international, probably at least 80%. We now have general managers in 3 regions around the world. We'll have 5 shortly. We're targeting India, Eastern Europe, South America, a little bit of Canada. Probably about 20% will be American. Our aim is to take somebody in a small village in India who has no access to a top-tier education and change that person's life. What we want to do is produce networks of students who've grown together as a unit, and after they graduate, will interact and produce something that makes a difference. So that's the S, the student part of the S, science. There are 2 aspects of science. One is there are techniques that have been shown to improve learning. So there's something called peer instruction, which is not really about peers. It's not really about instruction. It has a brand name that Eric Mazur invented. Carl Wyman has been involved. A fantastic scientist who I gather may have something to do with Stanford at some point. So we are going to be using those techniques, but also, more importantly, there's huge literature on learning, memory, motivation, attention. It's not being used effectively. There's just so much that can be done using what we know from the empirical literature to teach people effectively. So we aim to do that. So that's the S, students and science. Technology. So one of the really cool things about the job I've got is I've got this absolutely crackerjack team of engineers whose job is to develop technology in the service of the science, to actually figure out how to facilitate learning. So what we're developing is a platform that's for face-to-face synchronous seminars. So there are no lectures in Minerva, none. It's all about seminars, a maximum of 20 kids per seminar. The modal will be 19. The professor's always present. So I've been using this platform to teach a course on learning internally. It was used last semester at a medical school. They had residents in, I think there were 6 different states. So it worked out extremely well. After the semester was over, we got feedback, just what you want to hear, can't live without it, that sort of thing. And it's been very interesting internally to use it because it's frozen a couple times. And at which point I've convened the group together and done a face-to-face seminar. So I've been able to compare what it's like over our platform with the reality. And that's resulted in a rapid improvement cycle. So I noticed in our platform, when I would just be quiet, I'd ask a question and just sort of sit there waiting for somebody to respond. It was taking a long time. And when I did it in person, I realized what happened was I'd start looking at them. There'd be this eye contact, but I couldn't do that on our platform. So I realized that if we just move the mouse over the little icons of each person, move it along, and the icon expands now. So you can see clearly who you're looking at. And on their machine, your icon turns red when you're looking at them. So they know who's looking at them. And it works pair for pair. So we're improving the platform to mimic more closely what happens in a real seminar, but add all kinds of things you can't do in a real seminar. So we have in this peer instruction method, they're given a puzzle and they have to vote on the solutions. So typically the way it's done is with clickers, where they vote and you get a bar graph, how many voted for this or that, the alternative. Well, in our system, they actually type in why they're voting the way they are. So that you have a kind of just-in-time teaching where the professor can adjust the little mini lecture that follows the puzzle based on what the bugs are that need to be debugged. Also, breakout groups. We can do them according to multiple different criteria. So we've got not only the entrance exams and all of that, but all the data, how they did in their last class, how they did in their last test. So we can decide whether we want the groups to be homogeneous according to some criteria, heterogeneous, whatnot, depending on what the professor is trying to accomplish. So it's kind of seminar on steroids. It's really fun. Technology. Okay, alignment. Two things here. One is alignment of incentives. So we want the incentives for the faculty to be aligned with the incentives for the institution, to be aligned with the incentives for the student. So for the institution, what we're all about is our reputation. We have to get a reputation for training students who are successful in what they do afterwards, innovation, leadership, and in their lives, productive citizens. Okay? So we want the faculty not to be motivated by the standard kinds of motivations in top-tier universities, namely their research exclusively, but we want to move the dial so that teaching is at least as important a motivator as the research. So if you're in the top quartile, you get a $25,000 bonus. That's a bit of a motivation. Okay. The other kind of alignment is within the curriculum. So the first year, there are 4 courses that are foundational courses. We call them cornerstone courses, which give them the foundations that are defined in terms of foundational concepts, methods, and habits of mind. Okay, so we have about 54 of them we've identified, organized them into 4 sequences, 4 courses, and wrapped them in content that gives them a sample for the kinds of majors they can do later. So a common complaint you hear from freshmen or sophomores when they have to declare a major is they just don't know enough. So we're giving them a sampler in the context of teaching them these fundamental methods. So our idea was you talk to professors in English, say, and teaching a course on Melville. And you say, well, why are you teaching this? And you get 2 kinds of things back. One is it's really interesting and important and enriches their lives. I'm sure it's true. But also, we want to teach them to think. We want to teach them how to analyze. Well, if that's what you want to teach them, why don't you teach them that directly? So what we've done is we've taken goals like learning objectives, like teach them critical thinking, and break it down. What does that mean? Well, it means things like when you hear an explanation, think of an alternative. Challenge the premises. See if you can come up with a counterexample. Consider a control condition. Things like that. And what we aim to do is build cognitive reflexes. We want to shape their intuitions in the course of these seminars. That's when they leave. That's what we want. We want them to have different intuitions and cognitive reflexes that allow them to succeed, allow them to function more effectively. So the courses are set up with these cornerstones, and then they declare a major, and it branches off, but every one of them is defined in terms of learning objectives that build on the previous ones, branching. And the grade they get in that first year on each of those courses is provisional. It's provisional. They are being tested on those concepts that we've identified as crucial throughout their entire career, and their grade gets adjusted. You can do mediocre as a freshman and end up having a very high grade, or vice versa. So they know about this, and the software has built into it metrics. So we are scoring them based on how engaged they are, how much they use these concepts creatively, and 6 other kinds of things that are built into the software platform. Resonance, final part. All students start in San Francisco. It turns out that there are companies that will build you a residence hall for free. I didn't know this. It turned out a friend of mine was on the board of one of these. They will help you find the land, and they'll build it, and all they ask is to rent the space to the undergraduates at market rates. It's pretty cool. So we will have every student start in San Francisco in residential facilities. We think it's very important to actually have them physically in the same place, interacting. What we want is this network at the end where they have friends and they have people they're going to work with. They'll travel in groups of about 250. So they'll be in at least 4 countries. So every year they move to a different campus. We're thinking about Mumbai, probably Berlin is going to end up, probably Beijing, somewhere in South America. These are all being negotiated now, actually. So it'll be cohorts that move together. We'll be adding 2 campuses a year, if all goes according to plan. And we'll be using the cities as laboratories, as resources. So there'll be co-curricular activities. If you're in Mumbai, you should be learning something about microloans. It's right there. Talk to people. Find out about it. If you're in Paris, say, the Louvre's got a lot of collections. You want to learn about medieval art? That's a place to do it. So Minerva, it's something really different. We aim to take talented kids from all over the world. We will, if they're talented enough, we will take them. We will come up with the money one way or another for tuition. Our tuition is going to be very low. Not quite yours, I suspect, but in that range, if we're lucky. Somewhere, not quite that low, but low. And we will have financial aid. So to summarize the STAR acronym, just so you have some sense of what I was trying to do here. The S is students, science, technology, the T, science feeds right into the technology. The A is 2 things, alignment of incentives, so everybody has the same goal, and alignment within the curriculum, so that the courses actually build on each other, and they're very well defined in terms of the learning objectives. And then finally, the R, residence. That is not an online university. It's more of a hybrid. Most of the teaching will be done over our platform, but there will be co-curricular things that depend on the local resources. Thank you very much.
One of the things that we talk about quite a bit in 403X Education's Digital Future is if we think about physical co-presence as a treatment, how do we dose it efficiently? We know it's expensive. I often, come on up, ladies and gentlemen. I often ask audiences like this one to just imagine the collective investment that is represented by all of us making an effort, in addition to the panelists, and believe me, we're not paying them, the collective investment that we all have made to be physically co-present in the same place at the same time, and what value that brings. And you've certainly started us off in a very powerful way. First thing I'd like to do is let the panelists ask questions or make comments to each other. And then very soon we'll open the floor, and we have microphones, and we'll invite you to participate as well. Okay? So, anyone?
I want to hear their questions.
Going once, twice. Yes, sir. I'll ask you to stand up, and Daniel or Abby will give you a microphone. And if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Joel Harris. I have a young son who's 7, and he actually is more adept at smartphones and technology than I am. But I was educated in a very traditional sense. And my question is, in light of all the online learning, how do you achieve the balance between the social capital and the networking that you get from being together, from being with a group of people, versus being distributed and seeing things online? Because I think there's some value to each. And the question is how to integrate. So whoever wants to take a shot at answering that question.
I have mostly commuter students, not all of them, but most of CUNY students are commuter students. And so it's always been a challenge to build the kind of community that is natural when you have the luxury of not only working in classes together, but living together. I guess the question I would ask is, do you need 4 years of that? Or is 1 year enough? And I personally think that there is, that what we're going to see is a blend of these many different forms of learning. And I don't think we have the recipe yet for what the right quotient is. But I think that when we look at the economics of higher education, we can reach the conclusion that 4 years or 5 years is over, because no one is going to be able to afford it. So whether 1 year is enough or 2 is the right balance, I don't think we really know. But for decades, people have been going to commuter schools and getting really good education. So obviously, the community is part of it, but it is not all of it.
I would also interject too, it matters what you do when you're in that space and place together. A lot of the students at Midwest U experience frustration with their classes and, sitting in a 300-person lecture. I'm not sure if that qualifies as interaction. I teach a class like that at my current university, and I also teach a 40-person class where I learn every person's name. There's not a lecture in that class. I don't lecture. I do exactly what you suggest. I use the students as a resource because I have quite similar students to your students. And the entire class is an interactive experience where students build networks. So I think you also have to think about what just putting people together in a space doesn't make them interact. You have to think about what's happening in that space.
The only thing I'd add is that corollary is that we don't yet know what we're competent to do in the online environment. In other words, and I think that's partly because we're not clear about what we're trying to achieve. You can get certain subject mastery, clearly, through online education that doesn't require face-to-face. What's not yet clear is that you can do more than content mastery with all of these other social, personal, developmental skills, which a lot of us think are also the purpose of higher education. And that's not solved. Her point, I think, is perfect. That's not solved by being in physical proximity alone. It takes a certain intentionality. I think it takes an architecture, physical architecture. I think schools have to be designed in certain ways to create open, free space for students to organize in. There's a lot of other elements that are in tension. So both are there.
Could I just push on that for 1 second? But online learning can be more than just mastery of a subject. There can be interaction, social development, a sort of intimacy that is, and community building that occurs online, as well as subject mastery? Or do you not think that?
I don't think we know that yet. In other words, I know that's there's anecdotes that that's true. I've not seen detailed analysis that would compare the forms of community that develop out of face-to-face under the best of circumstances and the kind of community. It's like this. It's like the current debate about friends on Facebook. Are they friends? They certainly are friends. Are they really friends? What's a friend? Who's a friend? How dependable are they? In other words, I have a kind of natural skepticism about it, which I confess to, but I'm also feeling that we need to learn a lot more, rather than just I say it's not likely to happen and you think it can happen. So we'd like to know where.
Do we know what we're competent to do in face-to-face instruction? How do you some sense of the quality of the research base on which the default preferred delivery vehicle is?
Yeah, there's a literature on this.
Well, I know there's a literature on this.
So people like Eric Mazur and Carl Wyman, comes out of the physics community, actually. Turns out if you test physics students a couple months after their final introductory physics students, they'll retain about 10% if you have a standard lecture format. If instead you use these active learning techniques of the sort that Eric has designed, the peer instruction thing, it goes up to about 70. So there is a literature on how to do this in a way that boosts learning substantially.
Okay, that's not face-to-face co-present instruction per se.
It is totally face-to-face.
Yes, but it sounds like what you're suggesting, and to my knowledge of the literature that you're describing, is that the treatment is not the physical co-presence by itself.
Oh, right. It's probably a necessary but not sufficient condition. Yeah, I'm not even sure it's necessary. It might be that asynchronous will work, but no one's looked. The literature that I'm aware of is in fact synchronous face-to-face.
But the economics of Midwest U, my understanding of your argument, dictates that research is not going to be relevant because it's too expensive to organize the actual substantively informed face-to-face that he's talking about.
Actually, no. It turns out that the peer instruction method was designed for large lectures, where it's based on having. Can I say a word about what it is? Since I'm not sure it's made it to this coast. So the idea.
I thought I was the snotty New Yorker on the panel.
No, I'm surprised that it was badly named. So when you hear peer instruction, everybody thinks the students are just talking to each other, and that's not what it is at all. So the way it works is the faculty member has to define learning objectives, what you want them to learn, sort of the deep concepts you want them to master. And then what you have to do is come up with these little puzzles. They're called concept tests that force the students to grapple. So let me give you an example. So say this is from Eric Mazur. Let's say this is from a course on physics, they're teaching kinetics. Say you have a sheet of iron, okay? And we cut a circle out of the center, pop it, now we get a hole. We heat the whole thing up so it's red hot uniformly. All right, I want to vote. How many people think that hole will expand? How many think it'll shrink? And how many think it'll stay the same? All right, so let's vote. How many think it'll expand? Show of hands, please. Okay, how many think it'll shrink? Okay, how many think it'll stay the same? All right, and finally, how many have no idea?
You didn't give us that option.
Okay, so the way it works is you have them vote, just like that. Then you have them talk to each other. And it's based on who's next to you, who's in front and behind. That's the peer part. They're not really peers. It's random, whoever happens to be there. Probably not random, actually. They talk for like 5 minutes. And then they vote again. And it turns out the votes get closer to the truth, including, there's a Science Magazine article by Wyman's group on this, including if nobody in the group got it right the first time. Just struggling with it, they tend towards the right answer. Okay, so the right answer is it gets larger. All right, why does it get larger?
Yes.
Because you're pumping energy in, uniformly to this thing. So the molecules start moving around more, and they push against each other. And in order for it to get smaller, you'd have to overcome the energy of the inner ones that are pushing out with even more energy. But because it's uniformly heated, you don't have it. So the basic concept you're getting at here is called relaxation in physical jargon. It's about what happens when energy is added to molecules and how they interact and how it percolates out through a system. Okay? So
Well, this is a great idea. Why haven't we done this for every undergraduate academic field?
I don't know. I don't know. So we are building our software platform to make this easy to do.
Adding heat.
So we can define the breakout groups according, not just randomly. We can, when they vote, we can find out why they're voting. So, for example, one of you who voted that it got smaller, can you tell me why you thought it got smaller?
Oh, I can tell you.
Okay.
Because it's metal, because holes don't change. It's metal that changes. And metal expands when heated.
Right. And that's why if you're fitting a shaft to a sheet, they'll often heat the sheet up to put the shaft in, so when it cools, it gets to be a very tight fit. This is done in engineering, turns out. So the point is that these little exercises, these concept tests, are designed to change intuitions. That the way this started, I got to tell you this anecdote.
One more anecdote.
Eric Mazur was teaching Newton's third law. Okay, every action and reaction, remember that? And he asked the question, this is Harvard undergraduates. He says, what would happen if a Fiat going 40 miles an hour hits a semi-truck going 40 miles an hour? A kid raises his hand and he says, do you want us to answer based on the formula you've been teaching us or our knowledge from the real world? That was a mind-boggling experience for Eric. That's what got him going on this whole thing.
One of the reasons that got us started on that particular cycle is that I think, one of the opportunities and the great challenges of this moment is that the fact that so much possibility is being revealed for digitally mediated instruction obliges us to ask new questions about what this costly delivery mode is best at. Right? And it turns out, some good strands of scholarship notwithstanding, we know quite a lot less than we thought we knew about what works and what doesn't in a conventional undergraduate classroom. Again, whatever conventional means. Others? Yes, here. You stand and, right. Stand and reintroduce yourself to us.
Hi, my name is Nick. I have a question for Mr. Murphy and other panelists to answer as well. In terms of the learning communities you have at the Hi. In terms of the learning communities you have at the ANZA, I imagine you have a very sort of transient population, one because it's so big, and I think both a lot of teaching and students, faculty and students are part-time. How are you developing these learning communities when those populations may be changing so much? And I'm wondering with everyone, is there a tipping point as you're building these social networks? Does there have to be some sort of minimum of certain people being together for a certain amount of time for those networks to actually develop on their own?
The three things. First, it's key to organize them in the curriculum, so it's rooted in the actual curriculum. Secondly, it's organizing it also around, I guess I'm going to call them political outcomes. So there's an explicit calling out of our circumstances and situations. So, for instance, a lot of organizing around the state budget, around immigration, around documentation issues, around social justice, around inequality. So you're just sort of topically oriented. The third is that actually the transience isn't as much as you might imagine. We just did a survey and learned that our students were spending, they're commuter students entirely, there's no residence halls at all, but they're spending an average of 10 hours a week on the campus outside of class time. And that was unexpected. We thought it would have been smaller. And these are people very often with jobs and raising children as well, but the campus is a place they want to be. It's an environment that has a social vibrancy and a life to it. But that takes intentional programming. and engagement of students in the leadership themselves. And just final thing is there's an organized student government at De Anza has a budget totally independent, their own budget of $1.3 million. And the politics around who wins and running, and it's a quite contested terrain and very serious. And it gives people a sense of investment in the place. So I think in general, particularly around part-time faculty, you're raising a very important point. And that's a different dynamic than around the students. And we struggle with that a lot because we have 300 full-time faculty and about 550 part-time faculty. And, 3 years ago it was 200 more. That's a lot of people needing to kite together jobs at other places, and it's much harder for adjunct faculty to be committed over time. It's really difficult.
Yes?
Hi, my question is, I guess...
Introduce yourself, please.
Oh, hi, I'm Alice. I'm a Stanford undergrad. And I guess I'm wondering how Stanford fits into this picture of higher ed, because we talked about community colleges and Midwest U and these new forms of universities. And I guess as an undergrad, I feel like I'm not getting the most out of my money or my parents' money, especially as Minerva starts to take really talented students as well. So,
anyone want to take that? Betsy? Okay.
Hi, I'm Betsy Williams. I'm a doctoral student here at the School of Education. And actually, your question ties in perfectly to sort of the theme I noticed among all the panelists. You all talked about how you interpreted access as access to valuable learning, not just access to getting a degree or access to getting in the door, but access to sort of democracy enriching, usable learning that's not just limited to job market outcomes. And I think Midwest U had sort of the pathway. I really like the pathway metaphor, but Midwest U has the pathway where the school doesn't seem to provide this learning, and it's only through sort of the meta learning about how to learn and how to succeed. And it's really up to the parents to provide that. And De Anza is figuring out how to do that through sort of through La Familia and through teaching students how to organize. CUNY has the Honors College that's trying to build that community within and build those supports in for at least these top students. And Minerva U sounds like it's doing everything it can to build up that residential experience and that feeling of belonging, and have people who can sort of mentor students along on that path. And I think Stanford is very much in that mold, where they just pour resources into having residential fellows and counselors and professors who are at least theoretically available all the time. And I really thought it was interesting that this talk on access was really less about how are we providing financial aid, and also very, very refreshing that it was much more about how do we give people what we can really be proud to call a college education. And I think Stanford does that too.
Would you like to respond to what Betsy said?
I don't have that much, except it seems that Stanford students or parents pay a lot more for those things than these new forms of access. And I guess the conversation isn't, it's so much more complicated than just the financial aspects. But I guess I'm also curious as we move into these new forms of online and hybrid models more, whether you think an institution like Stanford as it is can stand and which directions you think it will take to the future.
It's such an interesting question. I had an argument with someone at another Ivy League institution recently about this, because, I mean, when you look 5 years or 10 years down the road, the argument goes, there were so many students trying to get into Stanford, so many students trying to get into Harvard. There will always be a tremendous number of students who want that sort of education. And I think that's true, but the question I would ask Stanford or any other institution that has that line out the door is, are they the students you want? Are you going to be the kind of innovative institution where the very best students who have all the choices available to them, including cobbling together an education from different kinds of points of access, are you still going to get those very bright students? And that, I think, is at the heart of what your question is. If you look down the road, how are students going to want to invest their years what kind of an education are they going to seek?
Let me just respond quickly
please.
about two quick things. One is, I think that the question and the answer raised another question that the Minerva example raised really well, which is also having a self-criticism, if you will, about what's considered the best, what's considered talent, what's considered worthy of admission. And so coming from the hierarchies of status, in which status is determined by the nominal quality of the people you reject, it's fascinating for me, speaking very self-consciously and personally, to acknowledge how deep and profoundly wrong my own view of what might have been qualified or unqualified might be. And to encounter students who by nominal metrics are not yet ready, who are in profoundly important ways, profoundly ready and deeply talented and extremely worthy of getting a fine education. So I think Minerva's challenge, this little spiky thing he did, I mean, I'd love to figure out how that works, because I think that's a really important other side of this equation.
Tyler, and that'll be our final question or comment. Introduce yourself.
Tyler, I'm from the Business School and School of Education. And my question was similar to the question about Stanford, but for the Midwestern use of the United States, and how each of you, because each of you have a different perspective and are taking different actions based on how you see the landscape. So, at De Anza, you're having to work with very limited resources and coming up with creative solutions. Minerva, in a way, you're at the opposite end of the spectrum and reimagining with a lot more resources. What happens to that middle pack? Do you see it as kind of a tipping point where we lose a whole swath of schools, or is it a slow kind of fizzle out?
Those are two options, Tyler?
Where do you see it going?
Yeah, I think that the Midwest U experience is going to persist for a very long time. I mean, this sort of gets to my comment that I was going to make earlier about the stratification of higher education, and that online education, people who can pay for in-space and in-place education for their children probably will do that far beyond its utility, in part because of sort of the prestige attached to that, even if that prestige means nothing at all. But people will continue to do that. I mean, I think some work, Lauren Riviera has this fascinating work, and I can't remember all the details about it, but the extent to which being hired by certain corporations is attached to where you come from, what school you come from. So it very much suggests that it's going to take a while to build up that sort of prestige. But back to sort of the middle swath of the sector, there's been some arguments that what's going to happen, I think, actually, is that those schools are going to increasingly, and you see this more and more, that they're going to push international and out-of-state enrollments as far as they possibly can. But there's only so many students who are willing to pay a high price for something that doesn't give you a very good return. So I think that something's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take for that to happen. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if it means doors are going to shut. That seems a little unlikely. But that's the part of the sector that's most freaked out, I think, about what's going on. Because people who are really, the really high-end, the really selective institutions, we're Stanford. We're not going anywhere. At the other end, institutions that are community colleges, they serve it's much more of a direct model. They serve a population that's got sort of different needs. The middle of that is freaking out, and they don't know what to do. And they don't want to let in online education, but they do. There's been a whole set of debates surrounding this. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know.
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and maybe it's because I'm from the Midwest and want to.
Oh, I am too. I love my Midwest.
But is it really the Midwest, or would you maybe throw SF State or other?
Oh, no, it's not the Midwest. It's not the Midwest. This Midwest U is not just from the Midwest. It looks like hundreds of other universities around the country. Chico looks
it's really the
just
middle tier state schools.
middle tier. Yeah, it's middle tier. They're all around the country. It's not just geographically located.
But you would want to, the only other thing I'd say is you would want to look in that sector where people are themselves self-consciously trying to address that. San Francisco State, in fact, is doing some remarkably good things. I mean, they have 350 courses a semester that demand direct community-based service. They're turning their residential life into a very different engagement form than a lot of other places. Western Kentucky's doing some very interesting things. There's a couple of the Wisconsin campuses where there's a lot of organizing going on. And I think, so in that middle tier, there are a lot of very talented people committed to the education that is more available to more people, let's put it that way, who are confronting these contradictions. I don't think it's yet clear who's going to win in that great thing, but it's not all one piece.
And even more vulnerable than them are the institutions, I think, we might call them the bottom of the top, the very expensive schools that are not absolutely top tier. Those are the ones where if I were president of one of those institutions, I'd be sweating the most because, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 tuitions, then when you look at the number of students who are academically well prepared and whose parents are willing to pay for that, or more and more are willing to take out loans, that number is shrinking dramatically. So that, I think, is the most vulnerable next up.
That's state schools.
Higher
You're talking
education.
state school tuition, though. State school tuition in a lot of states. Out of state, $35,000. In state, topping 20, over 20. So that's a lot of
tuition.
schools in the next, yeah.
That's right.
So here's what you do. Here's what you do if you want to have an effective 90-minute seminar. You find 4 very capable, ambitious people who have been asking hard questions for large swaths of their careers. You feed them well. You put them on planes. You give them a very brief assignment and tell them they can do whatever they want.
He flew me from San Francisco to San Jose.
and you got yourself a bang-up lecture hall seminar. Thank you so much to the 4 of you for your generosity.